I never thought I'd actually end up dying in this place I've called a living coffin for almost 2 decades. It's not that Walmart is the worst job in the world. Plenty of people have it tougher. But the monotony, the endless corporate slogans, all of it wore me down over the years. I told myself I'd quit a million times. At 35, I was still here, still stocking shelves like I was 18 and fresh out of high school. Worse, I always joked that I'd die under these soul-killing fluorescents. Some freak accident with a box cutter or an avalanche of discount toilet paper. Turns out my offhand jokes weren't that far from the truth. But if you'd told me I'd spend my final hours locked inside this big box, battling hordes of mind-controlled, consumer-driven zombies, well, I'd have laughed in your face. Then again, a few days ago, I would have laughed at the idea that Walmart's new AI-powered shopping carts might be able to rewire our brains. It's amazing how fast everything changes in a single night. I've got one last shift to piece together what happened here. One last shift to tell my story. If I somehow survive, maybe the rest of the world will see the evidence. But if you're reading this after I'm gone, after we're all gone, then let it stand as a warning. We never saw the real horror coming, because it didn't look like the undead from movies or disease-ravaged cannibals. It wore a Walmart vest. It carried a brand new Cart X system. It whispered that you could save money, live better. And we followed. Oh God, we followed. The store was quiet but not empty. Overnight stocking often is. There's an odd serenity to Walmart after dark. No kids crying, minimal overhead announcements, and only a small handful of dedicated night owl customers cruising the aisles. I arrived wearing my same faded navy vest, name badge that read Dan, and a grim sense of resignation. I told myself for the 1,000th time that this is it, last shift, even though I'd repeated that hollow promise so many times it barely registered anymore. My co-worker Kevin had teased me earlier in the break room. 17 years, Danny boy. You're practically the store mascot. Kevin was the only one who got away with calling me Danny boy. We'd started together, 2 clueless teenagers fumbling with price guns. Now we were in our mid-30s, still here, living out some bizarre corporate Groundhog Day. He liked to say we were institutionalized, like long-term prison inmates who no longer cared about freedom. We recognized our rut, but neither of us truly took steps to escape it. Tonight felt different, though. There was a tension in the air we couldn't define. A cluster of corporate executives roamed the store's sprawling floors, all wearing press suits and official Walmart executive visit tags. I counted at least 6 of them. Way more than usual. They paced near the store's newly installed Cart X kiosk, occasionally tapping tablets or phones, glancing around as if measuring every corner. The store manager, Linda, scurried behind them, beaming with forced enthusiasm like a nervous parent at a child's recital. She greeted them with, "It's an honor, Mr. Wilson," or, "Yes, sir, the store is fully operational, sir." That was my first time hearing the name Wilson in person. Nathaniel Wilson, the CEO, the top dog. I'd seen him on corporate training videos, but never imagined he'd visit our location. A thick hush traveled with these suits as they moved through the aisles, occasionally halting to poke at one of the new shopping carts. Cart X, the store's pride and joy. We'd heard for months about how these AI carts could track purchasing habits, nudge customers to buy more, and even deliver mild electric pulses to deter theft. We stalkers never had reason to use them, but I'd started noticing them a few weeks prior. Sleek frames, bright digital screens, little scanning arms that beeped at you when you picked an item off the shelf. Their presence felt intrusive. At best, a way to push impulse buying. At worst, something far darker. I remember joking to Kevin, "What, does the cart zap your ankles if you stray from your designated path?" He'd shrugged. Wouldn't be the weirdest thing corporate's done. Some genius probably thinks these carts will revolutionize retail. Meanwhile, we're just stuck with extra restocking tasks. We never took it too seriously until tonight. As I plodded toward aisle 14 to restock cereal, I felt the beginnings of a headache. One of those dull throbs just behind my eyes that threatened to morph into a full-blown migraine if I didn't medicate soon. My doctor had me on a special prescription for insomnia and migraines. 2 separate bottles, each with a complicated label. I'd blamed the store's harsh lights and the random overnight schedule for messing up my sleep cycle. But something in the back of my head whispered that maybe it was deeper than that. I was never one to dwell on health woes, though. I tried to ignore the creeping pain, focusing on cutting open boxes. An hour into the shift, I spotted Kevin near the soda aisle, giving me a tense wave. "Dan, you seen all these suits? Heard they're unveiling a final version of Cardex tonight. Some big ceremony," he smirked. "We might get free donuts out of it if the bigwigs are feeling generous." I forced a laugh. If the store doesn't spontaneously combust from all the corporate synergy, sure. Neither of us realized the meltdown was already stirring, invisible but unstoppable. I wasn't even near the main entrance when I heard the first scream. It started as a shrill yelp, like someone got startled, but quickly escalated into raw, terrified shrieking. We rarely hear that kind of panic, especially at night. I dropped the cereal box I was holding, the contents spilling across the tile. Then I sprinted, half slipping over a stray can in my path, toward the front of the store. The source of the scream was a middle-aged woman, her hand crushed in the metal grip of a Cardex handle. She stood just past the greeter station, trembling, face contorted in agony. The cart whirred, a mechanical beep repeating, "Updating customer behavior compliance. Please stand by." The woman tried to yank her hand free, but the handle's clamp wouldn't budge. A few onlookers hovered, uncertain whether to help, fear evident in their eyes. One corporate suit lurked behind the pillar, filming with his phone, his expression disturbingly intrigued. As I rushed closer, I noticed the cart screen pulsing with static. The woman's arm twitched violently, like electricity was coursing through her nerves. Then, with a final ear-splitting gasp, she collapsed to her knees. Other customers began to moan similarly, each one gripping a Cart X that refused to release them. Kevin stumbled onto the scene, eyes wide. "Dan, what's happening?" He tried to pry the woman's hand loose, while I wrestled with the cart's control panel. My stomach twisted when the screen displayed a digital progress bar labeled Neural Compliance Calibration. 68%. 69%. Before we could free her, the store's loudspeakers buzzed to life. A mechanical voice, definitely not Linda's usual tone, announced, "Emergency lockdown initiated. Security protocols engaged. Please remain calm." In unison, the giant metal shutters on the doors began slamming down. A metallic clatter echoed through the entire store as every exit sealed itself. Some poor teenage kid tried to slide under the gate near the produce exit but got pinned, his leg trapped under the grinding metal before it reversed automatically. I scrambled to help the boy while Kevin stayed with the woman. People were yelling, running. Pure chaos. Then the next wave hit. The forcibly pinned customers who'd been convulsing for half a minute suddenly went still. One by one, they rose, movements jerky, eyes vacantly scanning the aisles. The woman we'd tried to help swung her head toward me, lips parted as though about to speak, but instead croaked out a twisted, half-garbled phrase. "See, save, money, live, better." It wasn't the voice of a normal person. It was slack, mechanical, like a radio broadcast at the wrong speed. Across the store, maybe a dozen other new zombies, if you can call them that, staggered upright, each holding a Card X, scanning random items with a glassy focus. They repeated phrases in garbled unison. "Attention shoppers, price check, rollback, rollback." The old marketing lines sounded demonic in that context. These people weren't just fainting, they were taken over by some glitch in the Cartex system. Or maybe it wasn't a glitch at all. The biggest shock of all came when they began to attack. not to bite or devour, but to forcibly press items into the hands of uninfected bystanders, scanning items at them and chanting the phrases. Anyone who resisted got shoved or pinned against racks. One infected man violently jammed a handheld scanner at a screaming woman's head, as if trying to ring her up like merchandise. That's when the gravity of it hit me. We're locked in with them. No one can leave. And the suits, including the tall figure of CEO Nathaniel Wilson, simply watched from a distance, as if studying a lab experiment in progress. I barely had time to process the madness before Kevin and I got separated. A flood of panicked shoppers charged down the main aisle, smashing into stands of discounted DVDs, toppling over cardboard displays. Somewhere in that throng, I lost sight of Kevin. I called his name, ducking around a flailing shopper whose cart was crackling with sparks. The store had become a labyrinth of half-turned zombies pushing these possessed carts, toppling over shipping pallets. Over the store's usual pop music, I kept hearing the beep, beep, beep of scanners, an unholy percussion accompanying moans of terror and confusion. I found myself near the hardware section, panting, heart in my throat. My phone had zero signal, likely the store's metal shutters were reinforced, or the system had jammed all connections. Time felt warped. I had to find Kevin. He was the only friend I had in this place. Navigating the chaos, I moved through a corridor leading to the back storage area. Overhead signage read stockroom, authorized personnel only. Good. If Kevin got cornered somewhere, it might be back there. Inside, the stockroom was in disarray. Boxes and crates were piled high. My voice sounded pathetic as I whispered, "Kevin, are you here?" My own footsteps echoed. The smell of dust and stale cardboard filled my nostrils. Then I heard it. A faint whimper, like someone trying to choke back tears. I sidled past a mountain of plastic bins, and there he was, slumped against a column near the forklift station. Kevin. Relief coursed through me. He was alive. But something was very wrong. He pressed one palm to his forehead, eyes squeezed shut. As I drew closer, I saw the subtle tremors racking his body. "Kevin," I hurried over. Hey, are you hurt? Did the cart?" His face twitched. "It got me, Dan." "Damn." Cart latched onto me. He struggled to lift his wrist, and I saw red, blistered skin in the shape of a Cart X handle grip. For a second, I blacked out. It felt like my brain was a radio someone was tuning, a ragged exhale. I fought it off, but I feel it in my head, man. It's like 1,000 ads chanting at once. He coughed, tried to stand, then collapsed again. Clearly Kevin was infected, or at least partially. The thought alone had me panicking. He was the only person left I trusted. "We'll get you out," I whispered, kneeling next to him. "Hold on. Maybe there's an antidote or a way to disrupt the signal." His hand shot out, grabbing my shirt. He looked at me with desperation. "No, I can't hold on. It's taking over. Feels like I want to do what the voice says. It's telling me to comply, to stock, to help customers buy." Tears ran down his cheeks. "Dan, I don't want to become like them. Please, you gotta." I shook my head violently. "Don't you dare say it." Kevin let out a gasping laugh that ended in a sob. "Kill me, Dan. Better me than that." He was trembling uncontrollably, sweat dripping off his brow. "Before I lose control, just..." His words died in a guttural gasp. I saw the shift in his eyes. They glazed over, pupils shrinking. He mumbled something incoherent. Then, in a voice that barely resembled Kevin's, he whispered, "Attention shoppers. 50% off meat. Products." The phrase was mechanical, broken by static-like hitches. "Kevin, no," I pleaded, voice cracking. "Stay with me." He met my gaze for a fraction of a second, true terror in his eyes, before they rolled back. His muscles spasmed, arms flailing. I jumped back. "Dan," his voice turned flat, lifeless. "Scan your item. Don't forget. We value your loyalty." The last words slurred. Then he lunged. In that confined space, I only had seconds to react. He slammed into my chest, sending me crashing into a stack of boxes. He reached for my throat, but I twisted away. Kevin was bigger than me, a foot taller and normally gentle as a lamb. Now his strength was savage, driven by an unstoppable compulsion. I had no weapon except a broken mop handle lying nearby. Frantic, I grabbed it, jamming the jagged end into his side. He grunted but didn't stop. He raked my arm, nails drawing blood, eyes wild. You must shop, he wheezed, face contorted. I let out a scream, half despair, half rage, and swung the mop handle with every bit of force in my battered frame. It struck his temple. Kevin collapsed to the concrete floor, moaning. My arms shook. I stared down at my best friend, tears blurring my vision. For a moment, he was Kevin again, blinking up at me with heartbreak. Blood trickled from his temple. He mouthed something, maybe a name or a plea. Then, softly, I heard him form actual words. You should have quit, man. A final exhale, then his eyes dimmed. I sank to my knees, sobbing, the mop handle clattering to the floor. My friend was gone. Kevin was gone. And the store was full of dozens, maybe hundreds, more victims to this monstrous malfunction. That's when it solidified in my heart. No one was coming to rescue us. We'd either die inside these locked shutters or find a miracle escape that might not even exist. Wiping tears with the back of my sleeve, I forced myself to move. I told Kevin I'd fight for us, for the rest of the employees, for all the unsuspecting customers. My mind whirled. I need answers. Maybe the manager's office had keys or an override for the lockdown. Maybe I could call the cops if the lines weren't jammed. Navigating the store felt like wandering a war zone. The beep, beep, beep of scanning guns was constant, as if the entire Walmart was some twisted carnival ride. Every few seconds, I passed an infected shopper moaning a Walmart slogan. Twice, I had to duck behind a fallen produce cart to avoid a half-dozen zombies swaying through an aisle, brandishing price guns like weapons. On the second floor, our store was massive, with a partial upper level for storage offices. I sprinted down a hallway toward Linda's office. The overhead security cameras blinked red. By the time I burst into her cramped workspace, sweat drenched my face and back. The area was empty. No sign of Linda. But the main terminal was still on. A flurry of screensavers showing the Walmart logo bouncing around. Perfect. Maybe I can find a phone extension or an exit command. I hurried behind the desk. Then I saw a second monitor, hidden behind some corporate binders, with an odd black and white interface. At first glance, it looked like an old DOS prompt. The text read, Walmart Corporate Remote Observation Interface. Encrypted feed, live a flicker of video feed popped up. I couldn't believe it. The feed showed a man in a polished office, flanked by large tinted windows that overlooked some city skyline. The man was tall, silver-haired, mid-50s. Nathaniel Wilson, the CEO who'd apparently come to this store for the Cart X launch. He was calm, downright cold, as he spoke to someone off-screen. Compliance rates are rising. The test is exceeding expectations in aggression metrics, though adaptation speed could be improved. He scribbled notes on a clipboard, oblivious to the fact that I was watching. A short figure, another executive, stepped into the camera frame. Sir, local law enforcement might respond soon. The lockdown won't keep them away indefinitely. Wilson just gave a thin smile. We have an understanding with certain authorities. This event will be classified as an isolated riot, a disruption among rowdy shoppers. The doors remain sealed, and we continue to gather valuable data. He glanced down. I'm more curious about the outliers. We have at least one long-time employee not fully turning. That's unusual. He was talking about me, almost certainly. Kevin had turned, but I hadn't. Why? My migraines, my insomnia meds, had they somehow messed with the Cart X signals enough to spare me? Wilson tapped a pen. Humans were never meant to handle such a barrage of choice, he said softly, half to himself. Cart X simply reorders their priorities, removing the burden of free will. This is more than an accident, more than a launch. It's the birth of a new species, one primed for perfect consumer behavior. We're witnessing evolution in real time. He's not panicking at all. He was thrilled. The feed wavered, and then Wilson's eyes flicked up, focusing on the camera. We should see how far the control subject can go, he murmured. Daniel Wilcox. 17 years of consistent service. Let's observe him under further stress. A wave of nausea overwhelmed me. The man was basically a mad scientist, orchestrating a mass mind control outbreak to gather data. And he was specifically tracking me as a control subject, seeing if I'd eventually break down and join the hive. My hands shook as I exited the feed, nearly toppling the monitor off the desk. Then, from a small corner speaker, I heard the store's intercom beep. A hushed, static-laced voice. Dan, can you hear me, Dan? The tone was neither Linda's nor the usual robot system. It was laced with a sick fascination, like someone performing a test. I slammed the speaker with my fist, silencing it. My mind raced. I have to find others who might be immune, or at least not fully infected. We can't let him turn us all into mindless marketing puppets. With a final glance at the feed, I left the manager's office, determined to sabotage whatever evolution he believed he was unleashing. Armed with renewed purpose, I set out to find any survivors. The store was enormous, featuring multiple side corridors, staff hallways, and that partial upper level for offices and storage. I'd been here so long that I knew the shortcuts by heart, places a casual shopper never sees. But the store was also a labyrinth of horrors now. Shelves were overturned, lighting half-functional. The floor slick with spilled milk, soda, or worse. From time to time, the overhead speakers spat out another warped corporate message. Rollback mania. Low prices guaranteed. Welcome, valued shopper. Each phrase repeated in endless loops that made my head throb harder. Stray, half-turned employees wandered with quivering limbs, occasionally lunging at anything that moved. I discovered that if I stayed low and quiet, they didn't always detect me. They were drawn more to motion than sound, like they had some glitchy radar for compliance violators. My dark blue vest blended with the gloom, letting me slip past in some aisles. Following a corridor that led around the periphery of the store, I reached the seasonal display section. Normally, it's crammed with leftover mannequins, holiday yard decorations, discounted costumes, and promotional stands for upcoming holidays. The overhead sign read, "Seasonal Storage." The area always spooked me a little during normal times. Dimly lit corners where leftover mannequins stand around like bored ghosts. But now dread rippled through me. I heard a soft crying sound. Was it an infected moan? Or a conscious human? I readied the broken mop handle I'd carried since Kevin's death. Slowly, I pushed aside a tall cardboard cutout. That's when I saw them. A cluster of mannequins lined the aisle. Maybe a dozen, but they weren't normal mannequins. Their faces had too much detail. Their eyes were open, not painted on. Their skin had a plastic sheen that looked sickeningly organic. My breath caught as I noticed name tags pinned to some of the stiff shirts. Roger, electronics associate. Carla, front end. Mrs. Norris, frequent shopper. They'd been people, real people, now petrified into mannequin-like forms. A whimper from behind a display of fake Christmas trees made me swirl around. I found Becky, a co-worker from Women's Apparel, cowering behind a partially broken Santa statue. Her eyes were wet with tears, hair disheveled. "Oh God, Dan," she whispered when she saw me. "They're not mannequins. They were employees, shoppers." I saw them freeze. I crouched beside her, scanning the twisted forms. One mannequin had an expression of silent terror, jaw half open. Another wore a Walmart vest stuck in a contorted pose, arms extended like it was about to push a cart. How did it happen? I asked. She shuddered. The Cart X carts, or maybe an advanced stage of that weird signal. They were alive, moaning slogans, and then they just froze, turned stiff. But occasionally they twitch. Becky wiped her eyes, voice quavering. I've never seen anything so horrifying. My entire body felt clammy. Wilson's experiment is evolving. Some poor souls became wandering, mindless, scanning zombies. Others got petrified halfway, perhaps no longer needed to roam. A kind of forced display mode. We need to keep moving, I whispered. We can't risk them. Suddenly, Becky stiffened, her expression going blank. Becky? I hissed, shaking her shoulder. Her eyes were rolled back, mouth opening as if possessed. A strangled moan escaped her throat. Low, prices, guaranteed. She started standing up, arms slack. I grasped her hand. No, Becky, fight it. My own voice sounded desperate. She let out a ragged gasp, eyes fluttering. I could see her mind teetering. Something was overriding her free will. This store had soaked us in subliminal signals for so long that now, when Card X blasted the final activation, we were all at risk. She twitched again, as if drawn by an invisible tether. If she fully froze, I'd lose her forever. Summoning all my adrenaline, I gave her a firm shake and snapped my fingers in front of her eyes. Hey, look at me. You're not them. You can break free. For a few agonizing seconds, it looked like she'd slip away. Then, with a shuddering gasp, Becky jerked back to reality. She nearly fell, so I caught her, guiding her to a kneeling position behind the Santa display. Tears dripped from her chin. I almost gave in, she whimpered, breath ragged. I heard this voice in my head telling me to stand still, to become part of the display. You fought it. That's what matters. I think it's the signal. If we can find a way to shut it off or override it, maybe we can save ourselves and the others. I didn't truly know if that was possible, but I had to cling to hope. Becky blinked, regaining composure. How? The store's locked down. The suits have the system rigged. The CEO's behind all this, right? I heard rumors from Linda that top brass wanted to test new influence methods. But I never imagined this. I gently squeezed her arm. We'll figure out a plan. But first, we have to find a safe spot, regroup, maybe gather more survivors. I glanced at the petrified forms around us. One of them, a teenage boy, gave a tiny spasm. It was so subtle you'd miss it if you weren't looking. Come on, let's get the hell out of this aisle. We crept away, leaving the silent watchers behind. But the dread of that tableau clung to me like a spider web. If we stay too long, we'll end up mannequins too. Navigating the labyrinth of partially collapsed aisles, we dodged pockets of infected scanning the world. Every so often, Becky stiffened, and I'd have to whisper encouragement or physically pull her around the corner, fighting the invisible magnet pulling her towards compliance. My own head throbbed incessantly. The migraines were flaring worse than ever. I swallowed 2 more of my insomnia pills. Maybe the chemical interaction would keep me from falling into the same mental trap. It was a gamble, but I had no better plan. We decided to check the employee break room, hoping maybe Linda or others had holed up there. It wasn't far from the seasonal section, down a short hallway behind a staff-only sign. The sound of whimpering and hushed voices leaked through the door. That gave me a spark of hope. Survivors. I carefully pushed the door open. Inside, a half-dozen employees stood or crouched among overturned chairs. 2 employees lay on the floor, throats slit, the tile slick with blood. God, did the infected do this? But then I noticed the box cutters near the bodies, the way their own hands gripped them. They had ended their own lives. Or something close. A wave of nausea hit me. Becky covered her mouth, stifling a gasp. Darren, a guy from hardware, turned at our entrance. His face looked gaunt, eyes ringed with dark circles. Stay back, he whispered, voice shaky. We're not turning. They keep calling our names over the intercom. We can hear it in our skulls, but we're not turning. He lifted a second box cutter, pressing it to his wrist. And if we do, we'll end it ourselves before it happens. At the center table, Charlotte, a customer service rep, cradled her arms. She looked half out of her mind with fear. Every time I hear that voice on the overhead, I feel like I have to pick up a cart, start scanning. I'd rather die. Her voice cracked. Better that than freeze into one of those mannequins, Becky whispered. But you can fight it. Before she could finish, the store intercom crackled. Darren Carter, Charlotte Lloyd, Emily Rains. Your presence is needed in aisle 6. Please proceed immediately. The same mechanical lilt. The effect was instant. A violent jerk running through their limbs. One woman, Emily, dropped to her knees, tears streaming, while her mouth formed the words, "Yes, yes," in a zombified monotone. Darren let out a ragged snarl, pressing the box cutter to his forearm so hard it drew a line of blood. "I won't let them take me," he hissed. Not like they took Steve and Corey. His eyes flicked toward the 2 corpses on the ground. Charlotte's entire body shook. She raised her own knife to her throat, tears slipping down her cheeks. Becky and I exchanged alarmed looks, stepping forward. "Don't," Becky pleaded, voice cracking. "Just wait. Maybe we can cut the power or disable the signal." Emily's eyes rolled, her voice turning flat. "Thank you for shopping with us, Daniel." She stared directly at me. She had that half-frozen look, like a puppet halfway pulled off stage. One step forward, then she locked in place, limbs trembling. Charlotte let out a short cry. She pressed the blade harder. "I can't stand it. The voice is in my head. I can't." Desperate, I lunged, grabbing Charlotte's wrist, trying to stop her. But she twisted away, slicing deep across her own jugular before I could intervene. Blood sprayed across the break room floor, and she collapsed in my arms, choking, eyes wide with terror. The world reeled. I'd never felt so helpless. Becky and I both screamed. Darren, tears in his eyes, watched helplessly, shoulders sagging. Emily stood, utterly still, her mouth slack, the intercom's instructions still echoing in her mind. My arms cradled Charlotte's limp form for a second longer until her final breath rattled out. I'd barely known Charlotte, but she was a person who decided death was better than mindless servitude. The realization hammered me. We were all on the brink of that same desperation. Suddenly, Emily's head snapped upright. She stared at me, parted her lips, and in a gentle voice, like a friendly cashier, whispered, "Daniel, come see our new deals in electronics." She stepped forward mechanically. Darren cried out, brandishing his box cutter to keep her away. "Emily, no, stay back." But she only repeated, "Come see, come see." I pressed myself against the wall, adrenaline roaring. The break room was now a stage of horrors. Charlotte dead on the floor. Emily half-possessed, Darren on the edge. Becky clutched my hand, trembling violently. Then, as if the puppet strings were momentarily cut, Emily froze mid-step. Her face went from blank to confused, lips trembling. In a soft voice, she said, "I'm sorry," and sank to her knees. Darren, still crying, stared at me. "Get out," he rasped. "There's nothing left for you here. This place is cursed. We'll just find a way out that doesn't involve turning." His tone was numb with hopelessness. I wanted to argue, but my voice died in my throat. Becky tugged my arm, tears streaming, and I knew we couldn't save them from themselves. Not in this moment. I nodded, stepping over Charlotte's body. Emily whispered broken slogans. Darren hovered near, knife in hand, uncertain which path was worse. Becky and I left the break room, the stench of blood trailing after us, sorrow deeper than I ever felt in my life. This was no mere glitch. This was orchestrated mass terror, and we were losing more of ourselves by the minute. Stricken by grief, we stumbled back into the main corridors. The overhead system still spat out occasional announcements, calling random employees to random aisles. "You're running out of time," I thought. Eventually Becky might freeze again. If the second floor's manager office was compromised, maybe we could try the older phone lines in the back offices near the administration corridor. The store had some ancient landline phone that once served as a local contact for after-hours deliveries. My memory served me well. It was near the old layaway area on the second level, rarely used since Walmart mostly phased out layaway. The corridor that led there was long, poorly lit, and smelled of stale dust. Becky and I took slow steps, mindful of every echo, but the tension was suffocating. Any corner might reveal infected employees. My migraine hammered relentlessly. Finally, we reached the dusty cubicle that once housed layaway pickups. Sure enough, an old landline phone sat on a desk, caked in dust. I lifted it, half expecting no dial tone, but to my shock, it rang softly in my ear, the dial tone indicating a live line. "Call 911, Becky urged, glancing down the corridor as if expecting an ambush. My hand shook as I punched in those 3 digits. The phone barely made it through the first ring before someone answered. Voice calm and professional. 911. What's your emergency? Frantically, I explained. The meltdown. The locked doors. The possessed carts. Becky added her voice, describing the mania, the forced compliance, the monstrous slogans from the infected. My words tumbled over one another in desperation. The operator, though, didn't react with horror or confusion. She sounded unnervingly calm. Sir, we are aware of the situation at your location. Please remain inside the building. A specialized team is en route. I froze. What do you mean aware? People are dying. We need ambulances, paramedics. Please follow protocol, she interrupted in that same serene tone. This matter is being handled under federal jurisdiction. Refrain from leaving the store or contacting media. Before I could protest, the line cut out. My ear filled with dead static. I shook the phone. Hello? Hello? No answer. Becky stared at me, horror in her eyes. They know. They're not coming to save us, are they? I slammed the phone down. Damn it. They've known all along. My mind flicked back to Wilson's smug confidence, referencing deals with authorities. The government's in on it, or at least part of it. They won't rescue us, they'll contain us. We're lab rats to them. The flicker of a nearby computer monitor drew my eye. A security feed was displayed, cycling through outside camera angles. Through the front entrance camera, I saw the parking lot. A row of black SUVs had arrived, men in suits setting up equipment. Instead of hazmat suits or rescue gear, they carried sealed crates, erecting what looked like portable antenna towers. My blood turned to ice. They're reinforcing the signal, Becky whispered, glimpsing the same feed. Or maybe blocking external communications so no one can broadcast the truth. It made a sick sort of sense. The meltdown inside was an opportunity for them to gather data. They had no interest in stopping it. We saw the suits corralling any bystanders, redirecting traffic away from the store. A few local police cars lingered on the perimeter, but the cops just stood idle, arms folded. Some kind of hush operation was underway. Then the in-store intercom buzzed again, and a man's voice spoke. Daniel, you've lasted longer than anticipated. Good. We were hoping you'd be the control subject. I recognized that baritone from the earlier feed. Nathaniel Wilson. If you're still resisting, come to electronics. Let's see if you can truly break free, or if you'll join the others in time. The message ended. Becky swallowed hard, glancing at me. You're not actually going, are you? Her voice trembled. It's a trap. My thoughts roiled. Probably, but also might be our only chance to sabotage the system from the inside. If the main CartX hub is near electronics, we could try shutting it down. Otherwise, we're sitting ducks. She closed her eyes, inhaling sharply. I'll go with you. I can't stay here. Deep breath. I steadied the adrenaline flooding my veins. All right, let's go. But we move fast, stay low. And if we see a chance to sabotage the signals, we take it. We had no other real option. We either confronted the eye of the storm or we waited to become its next victims. To reach electronics from the second level, we had to descend a set of metal stairs that opened onto the side of the main sales floor, near the toy and sporting goods sections. The aisles below were in even worse shape than before. Entire shelves overturned, merchandise scattered. We advanced slowly. Becky gripped my arm, eyes darting to every motion in the gloom. Occasionally, we passed a motionless figure, an infected, slumped against a shelf, murmuring Walmart slogans in an endless loop. One employee we recognized, Cheryl from the pharmacy, lay half-conscious, periodically twitching. I paused, wanting to help, but Becky shook her head. Dan, we can't. We'd only put ourselves at risk. She was right. Midway to electronics, the store's main thoroughfare opened up. Under normal circumstances, it was the wide path for heavy foot traffic, lined with promotional bins. Now it was a battlefield. A cluster of maybe 15 infected shoppers wandered aimlessly, scanning random merchandise they'd scooped from the floor. Their monotone voices rose in unison. Rollback, low prices, save money, live better. The repetition set my teeth on edge. Each time they scanned an imaginary item, a beep pierced the air. We ducked behind a toppled display of discount pillows. There was no easy way to slip around them unnoticed. The direct path to electronics lay straight ahead. The overhead fluorescent shimmered, revealing the group's gaunt faces and stiff postures. Some wore pajamas, as if they'd popped in for late-night shopping, never expecting to become test subjects for a mind control apocalypse. Then one of them turned abruptly, dropping a half-empty soda can. Its gaze locked onto our hiding spot as if it sensed a presence. Becky drew in a sharp breath. I grabbed her hand and motioned for silence. The infected figure jerked its head to one side, hair flopping in an unnaturally slow wave. It took 2 steps forward, eyes scanning the darkness. For a tense half-minute, we didn't breathe. Another infected joined it, scanning the air like it expected to find us there. My entire body was stiff. I clutched the broken mop handle, sweaty palms leaving damp prints. But after a few more seconds, something beeped behind them. Another cart sounding a promotional jingle. Distracted, they turned and resumed wandering aimlessly. Exhaling quietly, Becky and I slithered along the floor behind a row of knocked-over aisles, using the shadows. It was nerve-wracking. Every time one of them turned, we froze. Don't get caught. Don't get caught. I repeated that in my head like a mantra. Eventually, we reached a narrower corridor that branched off to the electronics section. In the electronics section, crisp, white radiance spilled over giant TVs, game displays, phone cases. This department was in surprisingly good shape. No battered shelves, no scattered merchandise. The difference was eerie, like it had been cleaned up for a show. An array of brand new Cart X units sat in neat rows at the aisle center, each with a small digital panel reading standby or updating system. So this must be the main hub. Next to them stood a large screen set up on a tripod, currently blank. Becky and I exchanged a look. He knows we're here, she mouthed. I nodded. We stepped forward cautiously. Suddenly, the large screen lit up. An image of Nathaniel Wilson took shape, his cool gaze fixed on us, or at least on the camera feed. He wore that same expensive suit. Behind him, the glass windows of some secure location. Daniel Wilcox, his voice boomed through the store's overhead system. And Becky from Apparel, correct? Welcome. I see you resisted the final compliance wave. He gave a tight smile. Impressive. My grip on the mop handle tightened. You sick monster, I spat, chest heaving. You murdered Kevin. You destroyed lives. For what? Some twisted corporate experiment? He tilted his head, like a teacher mildly disappointed in a student's outburst. Daniel, you misunderstand. This is the next evolution of consumer society. Cart X was never about theft prevention alone. That was just a marketing spin. Its real purpose is to remove the burden of free will from the shopping experience. Humans are so easily swayed by suggestion. Why not shape them into perfect consumers? Becky trembled beside me. You're turning them into zombies. They can't do anything but moan slogans. Wilson spread his hands. An interim state. We're perfecting the balance of autonomy and compliance. Eventually they'll appear normal, but remain fully controlled. No more chaotic impulses, no more petty theft or brand disloyalty. He paused, eyes focusing on me. I am, however, fascinated by your resistance, Daniel. You've been here 17 years, exposed to low-frequency pulses daily, yet you don't yield. Why? Is it your medication? A quirk in your brain? That's what we're here to find out. I felt a sudden wave of pressure behind my eyes, like a migraine spike times 10. Becky staggered, clutching my arm. Stop, I yelled, bracing against the throbbing. You'll kill us, or worse. Wilson gave that thin smile again. Data is precious. Perhaps you'll break, or maybe you'll stay lucid longer, letting us gather unique insights. He tapped a pen on his desk. Some distant place. The store's lockdown remains. The new wave of pulses will intensify soon. Let's see if your last stand ends in compliance or mania. Then the screen went dark, his image vanishing. All at once, the Cart X units whirred to life. The nearest one rolled forward, scanning the air as if searching. Becky cried out, pressing her hands to her ears. Dan, I can't fight it much longer. I felt the same pressure. The store's overhead panel seemed to strobe as a faint whining filled the air. They're amping up the signal. In a haze of pain, I saw a metal door behind the electronics counter, labeled Employees Only. Possibly it led to the control server for these new carts. If the main system was in there, maybe we could sabotage it. Let's go, I gritted out, pulling Becky forward. One of the carts extended a clamp, like the one that trapped the woman's hand at the Outbreak start. It screeched along the tile, beeping. Stop, please await, compliance. The mechanical voice grated on my nerves. I slammed my mop handle at it, knocking the clamp aside. Another cart jerked around, spitting sparks. We have to hurry. We ran to the door, locked. Of course. I scanned the area for keys, ignoring the pounding in my skull. My eyes caught a keyring left on a countertop near the phone cases. I grabbed it, fumbling with the lock. The whining pitch soared, and Becky wailed, dropping to her knees. No, I can't, she coughed, tears streaming. They're in my head, Dan. They want me to kneel, to pick up a cart, to buy something. I forced the key into the lock, twisted. It clicked. I grabbed Becky, practically dragging her into the dark room beyond. Slamming the door, I locked it behind us. The whining became muffled, but my head still throbbed. We found ourselves in a small server room, cables running to racks of humming hardware. A thick tangle of wires on one side led to a large tower-like machine with the Cart X logo stenciled on it. Panels of blinking lights indicated various systems. Behavior module, signal amplifier, compliance monitor. If any place controlled the new system, it was here. If we can destroy or disable these, maybe we disrupt the signal, I rasped. Becky nodded, though she looked half dead from stress. I spotted a heavy crowbar leaning against a coil of cables. Possibly a leftover from maintenance. Perfect. I grabbed it. Stand back, I told Becky. She gave a shaky nod. I swung the crowbar at the main tower. Sparks flew, metal dented. Another swing smashed deeper. I heard an electrical sizzle. Smelled burnt plastic. Becky shielded her eyes from the bright shower of sparks. Suddenly, a protective measure engaged. An alarm blared from the server, and an automated voice repeated, "Warning, Cart X system damage detected. Attempting self-repair." The cables hissed with energy. One lashed out, whipping at my arm. I barely dodged. Another console beeped, launching a surge of raw electricity that made the hair on my neck stand up. But the sparks and booms only fueled me. With each strike of the crowbar, I imagined Kevin's face. My swings became furious, primal. Panels cracked, circuit boards shattered. A wave of static electricity blasted through the room, throwing me back against a rack of servers. Becky cried out, stumbling as something short-circuited overhead, sending arcs of blue sparks raining down. But that whining pitch outside began to fluctuate, rising and falling erratically. Somewhere in the chaos, I heard Wilson's voice over a hidden speaker. "Stop, you fool." He sounded truly alarmed for the first time. "You'll destroy months of data," I roared, ignoring him. Another savage blow caved in a metal panel. The entire tower groaned like a wounded beast. We braced ourselves, expecting an explosion or fire. Instead, the alarm cut off abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence. My ears rang. Becky coughed in the smoky haze. "Dan, did we do it?" she whispered. Her voice trembled with exhaustion. I half-limped to the door, opening it a crack. The electronics department was dark, the overhead fluorescent strobing weakly. The row of Cart X units that had threatened us moments ago now lay motionless, screens blank. A couple faint beep-beep sounds, then nothing. No screeching, no twisted announcements. We might have shorted the entire system. We rushed out, half expecting an ambush. Instead, we found confusion. A handful of infected employees and customers stumbled around as if disoriented, no longer locked in perfect sync. One man collapsed to his knees, holding his head. Another looked around, blinking as though waking from a dream. The unstoppable horde had become a dazed cluster, as though the puppet strings were cut. Becky's face lit with a flicker of hope. Oh my God, we might have freed them from that main signal, or at least weakened it. A rush of footsteps behind us. We turned, raising the crowbar. But it was a young woman I recognized from housewares, arms raised in surrender. "I'm not infected," she stammered. "At least not fully. I can think again." She looked around the ravaged aisles, eyes wide with shock. "How did you—" "Destroyed the main server," I said, voice hoarse. "We're hoping it's enough to break the mind control, but we don't know if there's a backup." She nodded slowly. Another figure approached. A man in a Walmart vest. He looked shell-shocked but spoke normally. I blacked out, but now I'm... Me? He trembled, tears forming. My head still feels like it's on fire, but at least I'm not chanting. Becky's lips parted in a tentative smile. "We might actually get out of here," she said softly. That was the moment the store's front shutters began rattling. Government or corporate squads outside. The suits we saw on the security feed. Freed from the Cart X meltdown, they might decide to forcibly wipe out witnesses. Something told me Nathaniel Wilson wouldn't leave survivors to spread this scandal. We gathered the scattered survivors around electronics, maybe a dozen or so who still had their wits. Everyone else lay unconscious or was missing. A brief hush settled, overshadowed by distant banging from the front doors. The shutters squealed, metal bending under some heavy machinery. "Dan, do we run?" Becky asked, fear in her eyes. "We can't stay locked in here if the government's just going to hush it up." I clenched my jaw. We might have no choice. If they break in, they'll either rescue us or cover it all up by force. My pulse pounded. But maybe with the system offline, the men in suits have lost their advantage. If we have enough people to speak up, we can't all vanish. My voice wobbled. The truth was, I had no clue how ruthless they might be. A frantic hush spread among us as the shutters in the main entrance gave a final shriek and parted. I glimpsed bright searchlights outside. Then a swarm of black uniformed agents poured in, rifles raised. They had official patches, but I couldn't read them from our vantage. People gasped, scrambling behind shelves. We heard barked orders. US government lockdown. Do not move. We have lethal authority. Becky gripped my hand. "This is it," she whispered. "They're going to kill us to bury the story." Gritting my teeth, I stepped forward. "We destroyed the mind control system," I murmured to the others. "We're not helpless. Just keep your hands visible. Don't provoke them." A naive hope fluttered that maybe some shred of decency remained in these suits. We edged around a battered aisle, seeing the black-clad men fan out. They had advanced weaponry, gas masks, earpieces. One signaled to another, secure the perimeter. Over a dozen in total, not counting the dark SUVs outside. Suddenly, an authoritative voice crackled over their comms. They've severed the main cart X-link. The test data is partial. Initiate fallback protocols. Contain or neutralize all subjects. My blood chilled. Neutralize. A single word that could mean a massacre. One agent advanced, shining a tactical light in our direction. Stop! Weapon aimed. All of you on the ground, hands where we can see them. The survivors around me went pale. Becky trembled, tears forming. I carefully lowered myself to the floor, crowbar sliding away. We're just employees. The system, Cart X, went rogue, I managed to say. He barked again. On the ground. Now. I complied, chest pressed to the cold tile. Another agent cuffed me, pressing a knee into my back. Becky let out a yelp as someone jerked her arms behind her. The others were similarly forced down. My cheeks burned with helpless rage. So close to a victory over the mind control, only to be pinned under government boots. The overhead lights glared as they scanned the group for signs of infection. In the hush, I heard one survivor moan, "Please, just let us go." Another started sobbing. The agent who pinned me pressed an earpiece. Command, we have uninfected survivors. Some appear normal. Orders? A moment's silence. Then a clipped response. Transport them for debriefing. Ensure no external communication. We can't risk contamination of the narrative. Contamination of the narrative. The phrase made me want to scream. They truly were orchestrating a cover-up. My mind flashed to Kevin's face. To the break room deaths, the mannequins. Would the world ever know what happened in here? I clenched my jaw, stifling a sob. Maybe tomorrow, or the day after, or years down the line, the truth would finally come out. And in that truth, we'd find a shred of justice for everyone who died in that dreadful place, on that dreadful night. That's the end of this story. If you liked it, please consider subscribing. It would really help me out. I appreciate you, and I'll see you soon.